The morning Helena Ravenswood arrived at Langstowe House, she counted 14 rooms that had been her mother's, 3 walled gardens her grandfather had laid out by hand, and one duke who set a stack of mud-speckled account ledgers on the table in front of her, without once looking at her face. She picked them up. She had her reasons. The carriage that brought her from the village inn was unremarkable. She had insured it. Her dress was the gray-brown of dried clay. Serviceable, anonymous, the sort of garment that announces a woman who has somewhere to be and no particular desire to be noticed getting there. She wore no jewelry except a small signet ring on her right hand, turned stone inward, so that the Ravenswood crest pressed against her palm rather than facing the world. She had looked at herself in the inn mirror that morning and decided she appeared precisely as she intended. A competent woman of modest means, newly hired as a bookkeeper's assistant to help settle the estate accounts. That was what the advertisement had said. That was what she had answered. Langstowe House appeared through the carriage window just before 9, and something shifted in Helena's chest. Not quite grief, not quite relief, but something that lived between them. She had not been here since she was 11 years old, standing in this same gravel drive with her father's hand warm around hers, watching the light come through the old oak trees that still lined the approach. The oaks were unchanged. Everything else had the particular wrongness of a place that has continued existing without you. Her father was dead, and Langstowe, her house, her mother's house, the house her grandfather had built stone by careful stone, was currently occupied by a duke who, by order of the Chancery Court, had been appointed its temporary trustee following the disputed probate of her father's will. The arrangement was legal, even sensible on its face. It was also exactly the kind of arrangement her uncle had spent 3 years engineering. The housekeeper who met her at the door was a stout woman named Mrs. Hartborn, with the assessing eyes of someone who made her judgments quickly and rarely revised them. Helena gave her name as Miss Helena Ward, her mother's maiden name, stated her purpose, and followed the woman inside. The entrance hall smelled of beeswax and cold stone, and very faintly, of the dried lavender her mother had always kept in the wall cabinet beside the door. Helena did not look at the cabinet. She looked straight ahead. They had nearly reached the east corridor when a door opened, and he came out. The Duke of Carvenmere was taller than she had expected, though she was not sure why she had formed any expectation at all. She had known his name from court documents and dry legal correspondence. Sebastian Vordwell, 4th Duke of Carvenmere, 31 years old, unmarried, appointed trustee not by ambition but by court order when Ernest Dallow had maneuvered the probate into precisely enough confusion to require one. The Duke had not sought this. That distinction mattered to her, though she was careful not to let it matter too much. He came into the corridor with the energy of a man who had a great many things to accomplish before noon and was already slightly behind. He carried papers under one arm and did not look up immediately. When he did, he looked at Mrs. Hartborn, not at Helena. He said that the estate ledgers from the past 3 years were in considerable disorder owing to the previous manager's system of filing, and that the new bookkeeper's assistant should start with the earliest volumes. He went back through the door and emerged with an armful of account books, 3 of them mud-speckled from a damp shelf. He set them on the corridor table without particular care, gave a brief nod in Helena's general direction, the nod of a man depositing a task rather than addressing a person, and walked away. Helena looked at the ledgers. She thought of 14 rooms. She thought of 3 walled gardens. She thought of the ring pressing against her palm. She picked them up. She spent the first days learning what had changed and what had not. The creaking stair on the west landing was still the second from the top. The library door still required a firm push at the lower right corner. The light in the south corridor shifted at 3 o'clock into something amber and particular that she had carried in her memory for 12 years without knowing she had kept it. And when she walked through it on that first afternoon, she had to stop for a moment and simply stand inside it. She recovered quickly. No one saw. The old head gardener was named Birch. He had worked at Langstowe for 38 years and moved through the kitchen garden with the deliberate economy of a man who understood that efficiency and rushing were not the same thing. Helena had known him since childhood. He had let her name a climbing rose when she was 7, and she had called it perseverance, and he had not laughed. When Birch saw her crossing the rear yard on the second morning, he stopped. He looked at her with the careful look of a man, confirming what he suspected, and then he removed his hat. Not the brief courtesy of a servant to a passing employee, but the particular kind of removal that meant something else entirely. Helena gave the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. Birch replaced his hat and said, "Morning, miss," in exactly the voice of a gardener addressing junior staff, and returned to his work. That evening, she found a small cluster of white dog roses on her windowsill, tied with garden twine. They were the same variety her mother had trained along the south wall. Helena put them in the water glass beside her bed. She did not cry. She had made an agreement with herself about that. She first noticed the Duke watching her on the 5th day. She was moving along the east corridor, slowly, allowing herself the private indulgence of familiar space, when she became aware that she was not alone. She turned. He was standing at the far end of the corridor, not walking toward her, simply there, with an expression she could not immediately read, not suspicion, more the look of a man who has filed something under a certain heading and is beginning to wonder whether the heading was correct. She met his gaze. She did not look away first. He walked toward her. He stopped a few feet away, and his eyes moved past her to the wall at her left. Helena turned to follow his gaze, and her breath stopped for one instant. The portrait was covered, heavy gray cloth, as portraits sometimes were when households changed hands, but the gilded frame was visible, and the shape beneath the cloth was unmistakably a woman, 3/4 length, in a posture particular and familiar. Helena's hand moved before she could stop it. A small, instinctive reach toward the frame. The way one reaches for something missed without quite knowing it had been missed. She stopped herself, not quickly enough. "You know that portrait," the Duke said. It was not quite a question. "I was admiring the frame," she said. "The gilding is very fine work." He looked at her steadily. He clearly did not believe her, and she could see that he did not yet know what to believe instead. That uncertainty appeared to sit on him with genuine discomfort. "The portrait is covered," he said, "as the subject is no longer connected to the current household." "Of course," Helena said. He held her gaze a moment longer. Then he turned and walked away. Helena looked at the shape beneath the cloth, the tilt of the head, the way the painted figure stood, as if she owned every inch of the ground beneath her feet. Helena reached out and touched the corner of the frame just once. "Soon," she said quietly to herself, to the house around her that already knew her name. Her uncle arrived on a Thursday. Ernest Dallow had the face of a man born to be trusted, open, warm, quick to smile. Helena had learned by 15 that this was the most dangerous variety of face a dishonest man could possess. He was 62 now, gray at the temples, dressed with the careful prosperity of someone whose accounts were somewhat healthier than his lifestyle suggested. She did not go to the entrance hall when he arrived. She watched from the upper landing as he shook the Duke's hand with the practiced warmth of a valued friend, and she watched his eyes move around the entrance hall with the quick inventory of a man reminding himself of what he stood to gain, Then he looked up at the house itself, with an expression she had to look at twice before she identified it. Anticipated ownership, the look of a man mentally moving in. She went back to her ledgers. She had 4 days. Her father had told her in his letter, the one she carried in the inner pocket of her traveling coat, where the will was hidden, what it contained, and one other thing. The inheritance claim had to be filed, in person, before a legal witness, within 1 year of his death. 4 days remaining. She borrowed Mrs. Hartborn's key for 9 minutes that same night. The panel her father had described was exactly where he said it would be, to the left of the window in the document room, fitted seamlessly into the wainscoting. Behind it, wrapped in oilskin, was an envelope. It contained 3 things: her father's will, signed and witnessed with meticulous care, a letter from the family's London solicitor, Mr. Longmire of Gray's Inn, confirming the will's validity, and a brief personal note in her father's handwriting that said only, "I knew you would find it. I am sorry it came to this. Langstowe is yours. It has always been yours." She read the note 3 times. Then she replaced the panel, returned the key, and lay in the dark with the envelope against her ribs, and allowed herself to feel the edges of something that might have been relief. 2 days before the deadline, she was passing the Duke's study when she heard her uncle's voice through the door that never quite closed. "She is my brother's daughter," Ernest was saying, in the tone of a man suffering on someone else's behalf, "and I have genuine fondness for her. But she has a history of making claims she cannot substantiate. About property, about documents she insists exist but that no one has ever located. I only mention it because I should not wish you to be troubled by anything she might allege. She has said very little to me," the Duke said. "Good," her uncle's voice settled. "That is reassuring." Helena stood in the corridor for 3 more seconds. Then she walked on, because standing still any longer would have required her to make a decision about what she did with her hands, and she was not ready to make that decision. She was still working through her breathing when the knock came at her room door. The Duke stood in the corridor. His expression was the neutral one she knew, but beneath it something had shifted. "Your uncle tells me you have made claims before," he said, without preamble. "About the estate, claims found to be without foundation." Helena looked at him. "Has he shown you my father's will?" she said. "Not a summary, not a paraphrase. The original document with my father's signature and the proper seal. Has he shown you that?" Silence. "Your Grace," Helena said, and something had entered her voice that had not been there before. Not heat, not desperation, but a quality of absolute steadiness that was perhaps more striking than either. "You are about to make a decision about a significant piece of property. I want to ask you one question. In all your dealings with Ernest Dallow regarding this estate, have you ever seen the original will?" The Duke held her gaze. Something moved in his expression, not belief, not doubt, but the particular look of a man who has realized there is a question he should have asked some time ago. He did not answer. He did not need to. "Thank you," Helena said. "That is what I thought." She began to close the door. He put one hand flat against it, not forcefully, just enough. "Be careful," he said. 2 words, low and level, the words of a man whose calculation had not yet resolved itself, but who wanted her to know it had not resolved itself. She looked at the hand on her door. She looked at his face. "I have been careful," she said, "for a considerable time." She found him in the entrance hall the next morning, hat already in hand. "Your uncle visited me at 7 o'clock, the Duke said. "He was very thorough. I have some experience recognizing when a man is being thorough in order to avoid being honest." He paused. "Show me." She withdrew the envelope from her coat and placed it on the hall table. He opened it and read every word, slowly, all the way through. and she watched his face. She saw the precise moment he reached the ownership clause because something in the line of his jaw changed. He read the solicitor's letter. He read her father's note last. He set the documents down carefully. "Why did you not tell me when you arrived?" he said. She had prepared a measured answer for this. She did not give it. "I needed to know," she said, and her voice came out quieter than she had intended. "What kind of man you were before I handed you the power to ruin me." He was very still. "My uncle has spent 3 years ensuring that my word alone is worth nothing. If I had arrived at Langstowe on my first morning and announced myself, you would have had 2 choices, believe me or believe him. And you had no reason to believe me, none at all. So I watched, I waited." The Duke stood at the window for a long moment with his back to her. When he turned around, something in his face had less protection in it than anything she had previously observed. "The deadline," he said, "to tomorrow. Then we ride to London tonight." He held the documents toward her. "Keep these on your person." She took them. She looked at him. "Why?" she said. She wanted to know genuinely. He seemed briefly thrown by the question. Then, "Because it is the right thing. And because I set a stack of muddy ledgers in front of you on your first morning in your own house and walked away." Helena looked at him for a long moment. "The gilding on the portrait frame," she said. "It is actually rather ordinary." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. "I assumed as much," he said. "I will be ready in an hour." They rode out at 11 o'clock through the back lane that ran east of the property, away from the main drive. The night was clear and cold. Helena rode with the ease of someone who had learned these fields before she learned arithmetic, and the Duke rode beside her and said little, which she appreciated. She needed to count the shapes of things in the dark. The elms stand at the east boundary, the stone wall along the north field, and confirmed that they were where she had left them. They reached London by early morning and were at Mr. Longmire's chambers on Gray's Inn Road before the clock struck 9. Mr. Longmire opened the door himself and looked at Helena with the expression of a man who has been waiting and is relieved. His waiting was not indefinite. Then he looked at the Duke behind her and required a moment's rapid recalibration. "Miss Ravenswood," he said. "Mr. Longmire, this is the Duke of Carvenmere. He is here as witness." What followed was 2 hours of meticulous, unhurried legal work. Mr. Longmire read every document twice and asked questions that were precise and occasionally uncomfortable. Helena answered all of them. The Duke sat in the corner of the room and said nothing unless directly addressed, and when Mr. Longmire looked at him over his spectacles and asked whether he was prepared to stand behind his signed statement if challenged in court, the Duke said, "Mr. Longmire, I have ridden through the night to sit in this room. I am prepared." At 20 past 11, Helena signed her name. Mr. Longmire signed below it. The Duke signed as witness. The seal pressed into the wax with the gravity of something final. "It is done, Miss Ravenswood," Mr. Longmire said. "The claim is properly filed. Langstowe is yours." Outside on Gray's Inn Road, in the pale London morning, Helena stood on the pavement and felt something shift in her chest that she could not name precisely. Not triumph, not relief. Something older and quieter, something that had to do with her father and her mother, and the white roses on her windowsill, and a portrait covered with gray cloth in an east corridor. They ate before riding back, at a quiet place near Holborn, and talked about things that mattered in no legal sense. About London in the early morning, about a bookshop she had known near Bloomsbury that sold second-hand volumes of botanical illustration. He told her he had not been in a bookshop in 2 years. She told him this was a serious personal failing. He looked briefly startled, and then, for the first time in all her observation of him, he almost smiled. It was, she thought, a very good almost smile. She filed it away without comment. They arrived at Langstowe as the evening light was going gold through the elms. Helena was thinking of her room, of sleeping for 12 hours without calculations running beneath her thoughts, when they came through the front door and found Mrs. Hartborn in the entrance hall with an expression that stopped her entirely. "Your Grace," the housekeeper said, then carefully to Helena, "Miss Ward." The way she said it was wrong. What Mrs. Hartborn explained was this. Ernest Dallow, before leaving that morning, had spoken at some length with the Duke's mother. Lady Carvenmere had been given to understand certain things about Miss Ward's character and intentions. She had requested that Miss Ward's employment be terminated before dinner. The entrance hall was quiet. Helena looked at the floor. The same flagstones it had always been, the same worn path between the door and the east corridor, where 3 generations of her family had walked. And then she looked at the Duke. His face was controlled. Beneath it, something was working very hard to stay that way. But he said nothing. He did not say, "This is her house." He stood between his mother's instructions and his own conscience, and he had not yet decided which way to move. Helena made the decision for him. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartborn," she said. Her voice was even. "I'll pack my things." "Miss Ward." "It's quite all right." She did not look at him. "The claim is filed. I will be perfectly well." She went upstairs. She packed with the neat efficiency of someone who has done this before and understands that the hands need work when the mind cannot afford to be idle. She was nearly finished when she saw the dog roses on the windowsill. Past their best now, petals beginning to loosen, and looked at them for a moment, and left them where they were. She wrote a letter. She left it open on the desk. She carried her trunk downstairs, declined Mrs. Hartborn's assistance with a quiet smile, and waited for the carriage. She got in. She did not look back at the house as it moved away through the elm trees. She held the envelope against her ribs with one hand and watched the road ahead and breathed. The letter she had left said, "Your Grace, I have returned Mrs. Hartborn's key to its hook. I borrowed it twice. She may not have noticed, but you should know. The dog roses along the south wall want cutting back before autumn. Birch knows the way my mother preferred it done, if anyone should wish to ask him. The portrait in the east corridor is my mother. Her name was Margaret Ravenswood, née Oldwell. She was 24 when it was painted. The gray dress was her own choice. My father told her she could wear whatever she liked to sit, and she wore that dress because it was the one she had on the first morning he ever saw her, and she never told him that, and he never knew, and I think about that. I would like the portrait uncovered when Langstowe is mine again. I would like it to remain in the east corridor, where the afternoon light reaches it at 3 o'clock. I do not write this to make you feel anything in particular. I write it because these things should be known by whoever lives in this house, and you have lived in it. Thank you for London. I mean that without reservation. Helena Ravenswood. The Duke read it, standing at the desk in the small room overlooking the south garden. He had gone up 40 minutes after she left, after standing in the entrance hall for most of those 40 minutes, saying nothing to anyone, and then going upstairs with the deliberate step of a man who has reached a decision and is moving before it can be second-guessed. The room smelled of roses. He read the letter twice. Then he went to his mother's sitting room and told her everything. Lady Carvenmere sat with it. She set down her embroidery. She said, at last, in the tone of someone encountering something unexpected. She never said a word. No, the Duke said, she didn't. She was very good with my headaches, his mother said. I don't often say that about anyone. He went to find Mrs. Hartborn. The coaching inn at Barton Village, 3 miles east. The last southbound stage on Thursdays waited longer than usual. It was Thursday. He was in the stable yard 10 minutes later. Birch appeared from the kitchen garden side and looked at him with an expression that reminded the Duke, with sudden and clarifying force, of Helena's own face. "The dog roses along the south wall," the Duke said. "She says they need cutting back before autumn. Her mother's way." Something shifted in the old man's face. Not surprise, but the expression of someone who has been keeping faith with something for a very long time, and is watching that faith begin to be answered. "I know how," Birch said. "I've been waiting to be asked." The Duke mounted and rode hard. The coaching inn at Barton was lit from within, warm against the dark, and the stage was still in the yard. He dismounted, went inside. The front room was low and warm and smelled of wood smoke and old timber. He scanned it with the efficiency of a man who knows exactly who he is looking for. She was in the far corner, traveling coat on, her trunk beside her chair, a cup of tea in front of her. She had not yet seen him. He crossed the room. She looked up when he was 3 feet away, and her face, her composed, guarded, patient face, came apart, just slightly, just for one unguarded moment. And what was underneath it was something that landed in his chest with a precision that left no room for uncertainty. She recovered, of course. She always did. "Your Grace," she said. "Don't," he said. He sat down across from her without invitation. "I stood at the bottom of the stairs," he said, "and I said nothing. That was wrong. Not legally, you are protected, the claim is filed. But it was wrong. You walked out of your own house carrying your own trunk, and I watched you go, and I told myself there were reasons, and they were not reasons. They were the habits of a man who has learned to manage difficult things from a distance and call it prudence." She said nothing. "My mother knows," he said. "I told her everything. She is revising her opinions, which she does slowly but thoroughly. She also said you were very good with her headaches, which from her is considerable." Something moved at the corner of Helena's mouth. "I would like you to come back to Langstowe," he said, "not as an employee, as its owner, while the proceedings resolve." He reached into his coat then and produced a letter, smaller than the will, the paper slightly yellowed. He set it on the table between them. "I found this in my father's correspondence when I inherited. I read it and did not understand it at the time. I understand it now." Helena picked it up. The handwriting at the top was unfamiliar, but the name signed at the bottom was not. Her father's name. She read it with the stillness she brought to everything. Her father had written to his father years before any of this. Before the illness, before the disputed will, before Ernest Dallow had begun laying his groundwork. A letter between two men who had known and trusted each other in the quiet, undeclared way of men who do not announce such things but act accordingly. The letter asked one thing: if anything should happen to me, and Helena is left to manage alone. Watch for her if you can. She will not ask for help, and she will need someone willing to see past the not asking. Helena set the letter down carefully on the table between them. The stage coachman called final boarding from the yard. Neither of them moved. "He knew," she said. "Both of them did," the Duke said. The coachman called again. Helena looked at her trunk. She looked at the door. She looked at the man across the table who had ridden through one night for a legal document and through another for a different reason altogether, and who was watching her now with an expression she had spent 2 weeks trying to classify, and had stopped trying to classify because some things were more usefully felt than filed. "The portrait," she said. "It will be uncovered before you return," he said, "tonight." She stood. She went to the door and told the coachman she would not be taking the stage after all, and came back and picked up her trunk and her teacup and finished the tea standing because the situation had resolved itself and there was no reason to waste good tea. "Well then," she said. "Well then," said the Duke. They walked out into the clear Thursday night, and the sky above Barton was enormous and unhurried, full of stars that had no opinion about wills or counterclaims or coaching inns, and the road back to Langstowe stretched ahead of them, pale and certain in the dark. 1 year later, on a morning in late June, Helena sat in the south-walled garden while the light came long and gold through the gaps in the old stone wall. The white dog roses were in their second summer since Birch had cut them back properly. Her mother's way, the way he had always known and simply been waiting to do again, and they had come back with the extravagant abundance of things that have been correctly tended after years of being merely maintained. The legal proceedings had taken 11 weeks. Ernest Dallow had filed his counterclaim with the aggressive thoroughness of a man who had nothing left to lose and a great deal to answer for. Mr. Longmire had addressed each challenge with the unhurried precision of a man who had been preparing for exactly this opposition far longer than Ernest had been preparing to mount it. The Duke's signed testimony was, as he had said in Gray's Inn Road, not easily discredited. Langstowe had been formally returned to Helena Ravenswood on a Wednesday in November, and she had read the letter at the breakfast table, the proper breakfast table in the dining room, where she had been taking her meals since the morning after she returned, and set it down and said nothing for a moment. Lady Carvenmere, who had taken to joining her for breakfast on the grounds that it settled her nerves better than anything the physician had ever suggested, looked across the table at her face. "Is it done?" she said. "It is done," Helena said. Ernest Dallow had left the county before the proceedings concluded. His name was not spoken at Langstowe, which was not a rule anyone had stated, and everyone observed without discussion. Certain financial irregularities in his management of the estate accounts had been referred to the appropriate parties, and were now someone else's problem to resolve. Helena had noted this, and moved forward, which was what she did with most things. In the entrance hall of Langstowe House, on the narrow table beside the door where her mother had always kept dried lavender, Sebastian had installed a small glass case on a Sunday morning without telling Helena what he was doing until it was done. Inside the case, on a square of dark green velvet, sat the 3 mud-speckled account ledgers he had set before her on her first morning. The mud on their spines had never been cleaned. Guests always asked about them. Helena always answered. She told it simply, the way her father had taught her, without performance, precisely as it had been. A woman who arrived at her own house without announcing herself, who picked up a stack of muddy ledgers and said nothing, and waited, because she had learned that some truths required time and the right witness before they could properly exist in the world. Sebastian stood at the edge of whatever room she told it in, and when she reached the coaching in part, he was always watching her with that expression. The one she had finally stopped trying to classify because she now knew it by another name, and she always, without meaning to, looked back. He told his version occasionally, which was shorter. It ended with, "I stood at the bottom of the stairs and said nothing, and then I got on a horse." Helena always said, "He rode 3 miles in the dark on a Thursday night because he stood at the bottom of a staircase and couldn't leave it as the last thing." I think that should be noted. It was always noted. In the garden that June morning, Sebastian came and sat beside her without preamble, in the way of a man in a place that fits him. After a while he said, "Birch says the east wall wants a new frame for the climbing varieties." "I know," Helena said. "I told him to go ahead. He was waiting for you." "He always waits for me." Sebastian was quiet a moment. "You have been telling this garden what to do since before I ever arrived in it." "Since I was 6, Helena said. "Before that, I was only listening." He turned to look at her, steadily, without the old management of anything, in the way she now knew well and had stopped needing to name. She reached out and took his hand. He turned it over and held hers without comment, without ceremony, the way he did the things that mattered to him. Quietly, completely, and without any intention of letting go. In the entrance hall, in the case on the narrow table, the 3 muddy ledgers sat exactly where he had placed them. Guests always asked. Helena always smiled and said they had belonged to a woman who had learned the difference between waiting and surrendering. That holding on quietly, precisely, with full intention, was its own kind of courage. That some houses, some truths, some people were worth every careful and deliberate day of the wait. She never mentioned that the woman was herself. She never needed to.